Poison Wind. In 178 AD, a Chinese military commander, surrounded by a peasant rebellion with no way out, deployed a weapon nobody had ever seen before. He turned the wind itself into a weapon. Yang Hisuan was the governor of Lingling Prefecture in the Eastern Han Dynasty, facing a large-scale uprising with limited troops and no clear path to victory. His solution was to make the air itself unbearable to breathe. He loaded dozens of chariots with bellows and large containers of fine lime powder, a caustic mineral that when airborne caused immediate choking, blinding, and severe burning of the skin and eyes. The chariots were positioned upwind of the rebel forces, and the bellows were activated simultaneously, driving a dense cloud of lime dust directly into the enemy lines. As the powder engulfed the rebel army, soldiers clawed at their eyes, collapsed to the ground, gasping, and broke formation entirely. Yang Hisuan then drove horses with burning rags tied to their tails directly into the chaos. The uprising was crushed within hours. The account is recorded in the Huhan Shu, the official court history of the Eastern Han Dynasty, making it one of the earliest documented uses of an airborne chemical weapon in recorded history. It is worth noting the historical record comes from a single court document, and independent verification does not exist. What is not in question is that the account describes a sophisticated understanding of wind direction, particle dispersal, and chemical incapacitation that would not appear again in documented military history until the 19th century. Today, the principle of wind-assisted dispersal underpins the design of every airborne chemical weapon ever built since. Repeating crossbow. In the 3rd century AD, a Chinese military strategist deployed a crossbow on the battlefield that could fire 10 bolts in 15 seconds without stopping to reload. Soldiers who faced it had never seen anything move that fast. The weapon is named after Zhuge Liang, the brilliant strategist of the Shu Han state during the Three Kingdoms period. Historical records credit him with significant improvements to its design, including a version that fired 2 to 3 bolts simultaneously in massed formations. It is worth noting that archaeological evidence dates the original repeating crossbow to the 4th century BC, nearly 500 years before Zhuge Liang. He refined and weaponized it at scale. He did not invent it. The mechanism was elegantly simple. A top-mounted wooden magazine held up to 10 bolts fed by gravity directly into the firing channel. A single rectangular lever connected the bowstring, the magazine, and the trigger into one continuous motion. Pushing the lever forward drew the bowstring back automatically. Pulling it backward released the bolt and loaded the next one in a single fluid movement. One hand, one motion. 10 bolts in 15 seconds without breaking the shooting stance. The weapon had one significant weakness. Its draw weight was considerably lower than a standard crossbow, which reduced penetrating power against armored opponents. Chinese military commanders compensated by coating every bolt with aconite poison. A scratch was enough to kill regardless of armor. The repeating crossbow remained in active military use in China from the 4th century BC through to the 19th century AD, a lifespan of over 2,000 years. It was still documented in combat during the First Sino-Japanese War in 1894. No weapon in human history remained in continuous frontline military service for longer. The Aztec Macuahuitl. In 1519, Spanish conquistadors landed in Mexico armed with the finest steel swords in the world. Within days, they were reporting that Aztec warriors had decapitated horses with a single swing of a wooden club. The Macuahuitl had been the primary weapon of Mesoamerican warriors for over 500 years. Its name in Nahuatl means handwood, and at first glance it looked like nothing more than a large wooden paddle roughly 1 meter long. What made it devastating was its edges. Aztec craftsmen carved precise grooves along both sides of the wooden body and embedded rows of obsidian blades fixed with natural bitumen adhesive. Obsidian is volcanic glass, and when knapped correctly, produces an edge sharper than the finest surgical steel available today. Each blade measured around 3 centimeters long, and together they created a continuous cutting surface combining the slashing power of a sword with the blunt force of a club. Spanish chronicler Bernal Diaz del Castillo recorded witnessing a warrior open a horse from chest to entrails in a single blow. The obsidian edge came with one critical weakness. It shattered on impact with steel plate armor. Once Spanish armored infantry closed with Aztec warriors, the Macuahuitl lost most of its advantage. Combined with horses, gunpowder, and steel, the Spanish armor proved decisive. Not a single original Macuahuitl has survived. The last known complete example was destroyed in a fire in Madrid in 1884. Everything we know comes from Spanish accounts and Aztec codices. Modern cutting tests on reconstructed versions confirm the obsidian edge outperforms steel in sharpness. A wooden weapon built without a single gram of metal remains one of the most effective cutting instruments ever designed. Thunder Crash Bomb. In 1231, a Jin dynasty general surrounded by Mongol forces on the Yellow River had no escape route and no reinforcements coming. He reached for a weapon that had never been used in open water before and destroyed the entire pursuing fleet. The Thunder Crash Bomb was developed by Chinese engineers of the Song and Jin dynasties as the world's first documented iron-cased explosive device. Chinese alchemists had been experimenting with gunpowder for centuries, but this was the first weapon to encase that powder in cast iron, transforming a fire-producing mixture into a fragmentation device capable of penetrating armor. The bomb was constructed from a cast iron shell filled with a mixture of saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal. A fuse of adjustable length allowed the thrower to time the detonation. When the iron casing reached its pressure limit, it exploded outward, sending iron fragments in every direction at lethal velocity. The history of Jin recorded that when ignited, it produced an explosion heard 30 miles away and sent fire through iron armor itself. During the siege of Kaifeng in 1232, Jin defenders lowered the bombs on iron, chains down the outer walls onto Mongol miners tunneling beneath the foundations. The leather screens the Mongols had built to protect their workers could not withstand the blasts. The miners were destroyed without a single defender leaving the walls. Contemporary accounts record the Thunder Crash Bomb as one of only 2 weapons that genuinely terrified the Mongols. It traveled west through trade routes and became the foundation for every grenade, artillery shell, and explosive device built in the centuries that followed. Aconite poison arrow. Around 1200 BC, armies across India, China, and Greece were coating their arrowheads with a plant so toxic that a single scratch through the skin was enough to stop a human heart. Aconite, known across the ancient world as wolfsbane or monkshood, was considered the most lethal plant ever discovered. Greek mythology described it as the first poison ever created, born from the foam of Cerberus at the gates of hell. Ancient physicians documented it with a mixture of reverence and genuine fear. The preparation process was precise. Chinese warriors boiled the tubers of wild aconite in water until the resulting liquid became thick and highly viscous. The concentrated extract was then applied to arrowheads and allowed to dry into a dark resinous coating invisible to the enemy. The active compound was aconitine, an alkaloid that attacked the nervous system almost immediately upon entering the bloodstream. It began with numbness and burning at the wound site. Within minutes, muscle weakness spread through the limbs. Vomiting and convulsions followed. In high doses, the heart simply stopped. There was no known antidote in the ancient world. The weapon was so feared that the Roman Emperor Trajan banned the cultivation of aconite entirely within Roman territories after repeated cases of political assassination. Ancient Indian texts describe detailed battlefield protocols for treating soldiers wounded by aconite arrows. Most of the treatments did not work. Alexander the Great encountered aconite-tipped arrows during his campaign in India. Roman forces suffered casualties from them during the Third Mithridatic War. The plant was used on weapons across Europe, Asia, and the Americas for over 3,000 years. Today, aconitine remains one of the most toxic naturally occurring substances on Earth. There is still no reliable antidote for a significant dose. Hellenic flamethrower. In 424 BC, Greek engineers wheeled a device onto a battlefield that no army in the ancient world had ever encountered before. A machine that projected fire forward under pressure and burned through wooden fortifications that no conventional weapon could touch. The device was built and deployed by the Boeotians during the siege of Delium against an Athenian garrison that had fortified itself inside a temple complex behind heavy wooden walls. Conventional assault had failed. The Boeotians needed something that could reach through or over those walls and destroy them from a distance. The weapon was constructed from a large hollowed-out tree trunk, split lengthwise, scooped out and sealed back together, forming a long, pressurized tube. At the front end hung a cauldron filled with burning charcoal, sulfur, and pitch. At the rear end, a large bellows was fitted and operated by soldiers pumping air continuously forward through the tube. The forced air fed oxygen directly into the burning cauldron, intensifying the combustion and projecting a sustained jet of flame forward at significant pressure. The range was limited to around 5 meters, but at close quarters against wooden walls and fortifications, it was devastating. The Athenian defenses at Delium caught fire and collapsed. The garrison was overrun. The entire account is documented in precise detail by Thucydides in his History of the Peloponnesian War, making it one of the earliest confirmed descriptions of a mechanical fire-projecting weapon in recorded history. The modern flamethrower operates on the same core principle: force pressurize fuel through a nozzle past an ignition point and project the resulting flame forward. The German army formalized this in 1901. The Boeotians had already done it 23 centuries earlier with a hollowed tree trunk and a pair of bellows. Roman lead sling bullet. In the 2nd century AD, Roman auxiliary troops in Scotland were firing projectiles so small and so fast that enemy soldiers could not see them coming. Some had been drilled with tiny holes specifically designed to make them scream through the air like an incoming swarm. The Roman lead sling bullet, known as the glans plumbea, meaning lead acorn, was the most precisely engineered ranged ammunition of the ancient world. While armies across the Mediterranean were still using river stones, Roman engineers cast lead bullets in 2-part molds, producing a consistent almond-shaped projectile roughly 35 millimeters long. Lead was denser than stone, which meant a smaller bullet carried more mass, cut through air resistance more efficiently, and hit harder than anything comparable. A skilled slinger could launch a glans at speeds approaching 160 kilometers per hour, with an effective range exceeding 300 meters. The bullet was nearly invisible in flight. Roman military writer Vegetius recorded that soldiers were more often killed by sling bullets than by arrows because the projectile left no visible wound channel. It drove lethal blunt force trauma deep into bone and organ through armor itself. What made the Roman version uniquely psychological was what was written on them. Recovered bullets bear inscriptions molded directly into the lead. Take this. Ouch. Catch. For Pompey's backside. Roman slingers were delivering taunts at 300 meters before the enemy could respond. The sling disappeared from Western warfare only when firearms arrived. It had been in continuous military use for over 3,000 years. Singing arrows. In 200 BC, a Xiongnu prince fired a single arrow into the sky above his cavalry, and the entire army followed its direction without a single spoken command. The arrow had told them where to go. The arrow was built around a hollow bone or wooden compartment placed directly behind the arrowhead. The compartment was carved with 2 or more oval-shaped holes, and when fired at speed, air rushed through those holes, producing a sharp, high-pitched whistle that carried across an entire battlefield. Different sizes of compartment produced different tones, and different tones meant different commands. Attack, retreat, flank left. The arrow did not need to hit anything. It only needed to be heard. The weapon served 2 purposes simultaneously. Among friendly forces, it was a battlefield signal system, faster and more precise than any runner or drummer. Among enemy forces, it was a psychological instrument. 1,000 whistling arrows fired in a single volley produced a wall of sound that witnesses described as terrifying to both soldiers and horses. Horses in particular were highly sensitive to the pitch and would break formation, throw riders, and scatter under sustained volleys. The first recorded use appears in the records of the Grand Historian, written around 100 BC, describing Xiongnu Prince Modu, using them to train absolute loyalty among his followers. The Mongols, Turks, and Japanese all adopted variations of the design centuries later. Modern acoustic analysis of recovered Mongol whistling arrowheads confirmed they were precision engineered to produce specific frequencies. They were not a side effect of arrow design. They were intentional instruments of war built to be heard. Scythian chariot. In 401 BC, Persian forces unleashed a weapon at the Battle of Cunaxa that no Greek soldier had encountered before. A war chariot fitted with razor-sharp bronze blades extending 1 meter from each wheel, designed to cut through infantry formations at full gallop. The Scythe chariot was developed by the Persian Achaemenid Empire as a direct response to the effectiveness of Greek heavy infantry. Standard cavalry struggled to penetrate a disciplined phalanx. The Scythe chariot was designed to solve that problem by force. The vehicle was pulled by 4 armored horses. Bronze scythes extended horizontally from both wheel axles, cutting at leg height. Additional blades projected forward from the yoke poles and downward from beneath the chariot floor. At full gallop, the entire machine became a spinning wall of blades covering every angle of approach. Witnesses described formations being cut apart and soldiers scattered before they could react. The psychological effect was often more devastating than the physical damage. Entire formations broke and fled at the sight of Scythe chariots bearing down at speed. At the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BC, Darius III deployed 200 of them against Alexander the Great. Alexander had prepared his infantry to open their ranks and let the chariots pass through harmlessly. They were then surrounded from behind and destroyed. It was the last time they were used effectively in a major engagement. Disciplined armies learned that simply opening ranks neutralized them entirely, and by the 1st century BC, the weapon had disappeared from warfare. Greek fire. In 672 AD, the Byzantine Empire deployed a weapon that burned on water, stuck to human skin, and could not be extinguished by any means known to their enemies. The weapon was developed by a Greek architect named Hellenic, who fled Syria and arrived in Constantinople with a formula the Byzantine emperor immediately classified as a state secret. The formula, the delivery system, and the training required to operate it were compartmentalized so completely that even enemies who captured the liquid and the bronze tubes used to deploy it could not replicate either one. The mixture was petroleum-based, most likely crude oil combined with resins, quicklime, and other compounds that scholars still debate today. What made it unlike anything before it was its behavior. It ignited on contact with water rather than being extinguished by it. It clung to wood, rigging, sails, and skin, and continued burning regardless of what was thrown at it. The only known method of extinguishing it was a mixture of vinegar, sand, and urine. Byzantine warships mounted pressurized bronze tubes at their prows that sprayed the liquid in a continuous stream onto enemy vessels. At close range, entire fleets were engulfed within minutes. Soldiers who jumped overboard found the fire followed them onto the water. The psychological effect on enemy forces was as devastating as the physical destruction. Arab naval commanders who survived reported their crews refusing to engage Byzantine warships entirely after witnessing it once. The formula was passed from emperor to emperor as one of the 3 things that must never fall into foreign hands. After the 13th century, Greek fire disappears entirely from historical record. The formula died with the empire that created it. To this day, no chemist or historian has successfully recreated a substance that behaves exactly as the historical accounts describe. One of the most devastating weapons ever deployed in human warfare remains completely unknown. Cretan bow. Around 500 BC, every major empire in the Mediterranean, from Persia to Macedonia to Rome, was paying to have the same soldiers in their army. Not their own men. Cretans. Cretan archers had been training with the bows since childhood, on an island where archery was woven into daily life through hunting, competition, and constant intercity warfare. By the time the classical world needed professional ranged troops, there was simply nobody better. The bow itself was a composite weapon built from a wooden core, laminated with layers of animal horn on the belly and sinew on the back. Horn resists compression, while sinew resists tension, and together they stored far more energy than a simple wooden bow of the same size. The tips curved sharply outward, giving the weapon its distinctive shape and maximizing the release of stored energy into the arrow. The arrowheads were heavy triangular iron spikes designed specifically to penetrate bronze and leather armor, at distances other archers could not reach. Effective range was close to 200 meters, nearly double that of standard infantry bows of the same era. Alexander the Great brought 2,500 Cretan archers with him on his campaign from Greece to India. Roman commanders during the Punic Wars hired them as auxiliaries because Roman legions had no equivalent range capability. During the retreat of the 10,000 cut off from supplies deep in Persian territory, Cretan archers gathered spent Persian arrows from the battlefield and fired them back. They were so effective that Persian cavalry refused to engage them directly. The composite bow design the Cretans perfected remained the dominant range weapon technology for over 2,000 years. Scythian wrote arrows. In the 7th century BC, Scythian warriors were already winning battles before a single arrow landed. The smell of what was coming was enough to make enemy soldiers break formation. The Scythians were nomadic warriors from the Eurasian steppes who fought on horseback, and whose military reputation stretched from China to the Black Sea. Their composite bow was already one of the most powerful ranged weapons of the ancient world. What they put on the tips made it something far worse. The poison was called Scythicon, and the process of making it took months. Shamans collected decomposed viper bodies and their extracted venom, then combined them with human blood and animal feces in sealed vessels buried underground until the entire mixture had fully putrefied. The resulting substance was applied to arrowheads and allowed to dry. A scratch was enough. Within hours, tissue around the wound began to die. Swelling spread through the limbs. Vomiting and convulsions followed. Gangrene set in within 2 days. Tetanus followed shortly after. Survivors were recorded in ancient sources as exceptions. The Scythians did not keep the formula secret. Ancient Greek historians documented the ingredients in precise detail, suggesting the Scythians advertised it deliberately to maximize psychological impact. Facing arrows carried a guaranteed death sentence did something to a soldier's nerve that no conventional weapon could replicate. Modern forensic analysis confirmed that the putrefied mixture contained precisely the bacteria ancient accounts describe. Tetanus and gangrene caused organisms that behaved exactly as historical sources recorded. The word toxic derives from the ancient Greek word for the Scythian poison arrow. Every time that word is used in modern medicine, the Scythians are still there.